My name is Angelina, and I'm a metalsmith. I graduated from Cal State Long Beach in 2010 under the guidance of Susanna Spears. And I may as well have been hanging off the edge of a cliff when she found me. I was in drawing and painting, which was, I had the good fortune of growing up with a family that really supported artistic endeavors and forced them, in fact. So I was about 4 classes away from graduating in that major when I took a jewelry class. They make you take 3 classes outside of your specialization in the Cal State system. And I thought, I buy so much jewelry, I'm going to make my own. So I was really thinking it was going to be like a wire wrapping experience. Like, here's a design you're going to make. You can alter it. Here's some pliers. I was like, I'm down for this. And I get to class, and they hand me a saw frame and a piece of metal. Just like, what do I do with this? And the experience really changed my life because it forced me to think about morphing things and altering things in a way that I really didn't think was possible. This is a little bit of the work that I did for my BFA show. It's a lot of tools for sophistication. If you're crass and unpolished, you use these tools, and they elevate you. They make you worldly and sophisticated, and humor has always been a really important facet of my learning in my life. This is a cigarette holder with a mustache. Outside of school, I did this little magnetic mustache product. So it's a polyurethane mustache, and it has a magnet that you put in your mouth. It's rubber-coated. And then you stick the magnetic mustache on it. It's far superior to the sticky mustaches that fall off in your drinks at parties. One element of my BFA show, I wanted it to be an interactive experience for everyone that came in. So what I did is I made a shelf, and I put all these mustaches on sticks hanging below it so that when people came into the gallery, they could pick up the mustache and walk around with it. In fact, I think I have one. I do have one. Oh, here it is. I do have some samples of a couple things today. If anyone wants to see them, I will whip them out for you. But so everyone could walk around the gallery and then use the monocle to inspect the work very closely. Alongside all the very humorous pieces in the show, there were some more serious, somber pieces. This is some work that I do with doorknobs. I have a bit of an obsession with antique hardware and things that were made on the old industrial machines. So I find doorknobs that are either steel or bronze, depending on if they were saved through the war and not recycled, and I take them apart and I retrofit them, and I put little miniature scenes inside, or just make them into beautiful boxes or lockets or jewelry. So this is, to the right, there's the doorknob with the etched wood floor that has a miniature of my childhood bedroom inside. Then the taller doorknob circa 1901 to the left has a miniature carved mattress. This is a doorknob that was 2 doorknobs actually that was made into a little box. I liked it so much I made one into a locket for myself. I do some pieces that can be reinstalled back into the old hardware if your house does support it, so that the doorknob is so overlooked, and it's such an ordinary, but it's such an intimate object. We touch it every day. It offers you security. It offers you access, or it doesn't. So I mean, it's kind of like hidden art out in the open, something that you wouldn't expect. I find it very exciting. This one is more of a sculpture. It's reinstallable at all. It's a box that opens up, as is this one. All the elements that are used for it are recycled from old lock tumblers. So the hardware, if you take it apart and let the spring fly out, that will take out your eye, because every time you open it, it's like oh, I always forget about that. But once you get past that, if you get past that, you find all the really interesting tumblers, and they're all designed for the specific purpose of making the lock work. But when you pull them out, they look so cool and so funny. So I just like to take them apart and use them for all kinds of things. This is a little bit of jewelry that I do, kind of based off of keys and some of the hardware. When I did have my BFA show, I was trying to get an internship with this company in Long Beach, Skinny Dog Design Company, with Scott and Jen. And I remember them. I sent them an email, and then they sent me an email back, and they're like, you know, your stuff is very different from what we do. Like, what do you want to do? And I took a few days. I didn't respond. I never respond to things like right on the spot because I like to think about them. I'm like, that's not an immediate problem. I'm going to think about it for 2 days and get back to this. So they called me, and they're like, hey, you contacted us, and you wanted an internship with us, and then you didn't respond. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I have my BFA show in like 2 days. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll come. So I was like, oh, okay. And sure enough, I'm at my BFA show, and I'm in my little bow tie, and I'm, you know, hamming it up for the crowd. And this guy comes up to me, and he's like, hey. I'm like, hey. He's like, pulls a box out of his pocket. He's like, can you make this? And my father's passed away, but his words ring in my head. He's like, if anybody ever asks you if you can do something, say yes. If you stammer or you hesitate or you say no, you will lose out on the opportunity of ever trying. And if you're smart enough, you will figure out how to do it. So I saw the box, and instantly I was just like, yes, of course I can do this. So turns out they were subcontracted by Disney for the Pirates 4 movie. And they said, this is Captain Barbossa's box, and we need 4 of them. And they have to spring open when he flips a switch on the side, and the inside has to be mirror finish. I was like, okay, that sounds cool. So I spent the next few weeks figuring out how to make the box, and working under a great deal of pressure from I was just done with my BFA show, but I was finishing my last semester of classes, and the program head was very accommodating to how much time I needed to be in the studio. So these are all of my horrible little Frankenstein boat shapes. I was trying to get the bottom of that box correct. And sure enough, I metalsmith myself right into a sling. It was tendonitis and bursitis in no time. So I was also taking 2 metalsmithing classes because I love metalsmithing. It's really meditative and therapeutic to be able to take something flat and just make it into whatever you want. And I've seen some amazing work that people are doing. And it never ceases to inspire and just excite me. So the top of the box was etched. I had pretty good etching skills, and the facilities at Cal State Long Beach are really controlled in the acid room, so you can get an etch without a ton of pitting, if you put your P&P paper right on and everything. The hollow form at the bottom of the box has this. Laser pointer, has this lip that gets soldered onto the outside. This little hole right here is for the spring that will flip the lid up when the switch is triggered. I use whiteout because when I start a project, I gauge whether the product is more important than the brain cells that I will lose by using whiteout. And so I figured this project was pretty important to me. So I was like, I'm going to use whiteout and not have to worry about my etching getting filled with solder. Whiteout is a solder resist. So solder thinks that whiteout is so dirty it won't go anywhere near it. I use binding wire to keep my form together really, really tight while I solder. All of this white stuff you see here is flux. So the solder is flooded, and this is the little trigger that I designed for the inside. So this little switch here moves forward and back, and this post comes through it. So I didn't solder my switch to my box, and I just soldered it and tagged it on the very end and then finished it. This is the little tooth on the inside that the slot moves out of to let the force of the spring flip the box open. I ended up making 4 of them. And I also, with this project, learned that no matter how much effort you put into these things and how well they work for whatever movie it is or how beautiful they are at the end, it's always the director's choice, what scenes get cut. So this did not even make it to the extended version of the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But, I would rather learn that on my first project than get any sort of sense that couldn't happen. Outside of school, I went on Craigslist. I moved up to LA after living in Long Beach for 4 years. And I couldn't find a job in Long Beach, and I applied to a bunch of different places. And I moved up to LA because I figured if I'm at least there every day, I'm going to run into someone. Someone is going to, meet me, and I'm going to be able to impress them enough so that they might let me solder for them. And I was on Craigslist, and I responded to about 80 ads in the span of about a month, and I heard back from 2. And I worked for a downtown jewelry company for about 6 months. About 4 months into it, I got this email from Michael's business partner at the time, and she said, we put out this ad 4 months ago, and we weren't ready at the time, but we wanted to find someone, but we saved your resume. Can you come in and meet the designer? And I was kind of like, I have a full-time job now. She's like, well, work around your schedule. I'm like, work around my schedule? Okay, all right, I'll come and meet your designer. So I didn't know what I was walking into, but I walked into a meeting with Michael Schmidt. And it's a name that I didn't know, but I was surprised to find that I knew most of the work that he did for celebrities. He's on a bunch of different Rolling Stones covers for pieces on celebrities, and I don't know a lot of the names of people that he does stuff for because I don't have a television. It's not really my scene to follow that. But I remember sitting down on the couch with him, and he has this wall of posters autographed by celebrities that he's done stuff for. And I was like, oh, okay, I know Fergie. That's Cher. And I didn't even know really what Madonna looked like. So I was, okay, that's Madonna, cool. And I didn't tell him that for about a year. And when I did tell him, he laughed. And he's like, no wonder you can never answer my questions about what Rihanna's doing right now. I'm like, I don't know. So he brought me on as a soldering technician because he does a lot of purses, like production purses for Chrome Hearts. So it's soldering sheets of this sterling silver chainmail mesh material. And I did probably maybe 20 of those, and they take like 10 hours each before we actually sat down and had a conversation. When I did interview with him, they said, bring samples. So of course I brought everything I've ever done. And I put it on the table because, I figure he wants to see like technique execution. So I've never had an interview like this where someone's picking up everything and just looking at everything and every moment asking questions. How did you do this? Can you do it again? Can you do it with that metal? He was really interested in like the science of it. And he's a student at heart. He's always learning new things. But it was about a year into working with him before he actually asked me to help him on an entertainment wardrobing project. Because most of the stuff he does, it's a lot of fashion, it's a lot of applique, but as far as like metal, he's never had a need for like a big metal thing. So, sorry. But the first project that he asked me to work on, I was sitting in my garage, I had a little studio in my garage in Atwater Village, and I was sitting there and I was tinkering on something on like Friday night, and he called me up, he's like, what are you doing this weekend? Like, nothing. He's like, do you want to help on a project? I'm like, oh, all right. And for the next 3 days, we pretty much stayed up straight because the deadlines for these projects are always insane, and that's the only reason you get the project is because you can do it in the amount of time that they need it in. Everything starts out from a paper model. You learn so many different problems that you would have encountered in metal in paper that skipping the step oftentimes would either ruin a job and ruin your reputation or just frustrate you endlessly until you did finish it, if you did. So this is Michael's hand. So he came over and we worked on the paper model together and made sure that everything met to the different specifications that he's the designer that he desired. I fabricate things for him. After having a paper model, it's fairly easy to figure everything out in metal because at that point it's just putting it together, fabricating it in different techniques. So this is a thin brass sheet. It was hammer textured and then soldered together into the form that you see here, which was then drilled and applied to the leather with rivets. But brass tarnishes, and I've tried a bunch of different clear coats. We used Renaissance wax in school, and that works for a while, but if it's something that you touch often, if it's something that you wear, it's going to wear off, and then you're going to have bits of unevenness. So I went to Galindo Paint over in Montebello, and they sell also automotive paint. So I got clear automotive paint, and we just airbrushed this so it would never tarnish. It's beautiful. It has a great luster. This is Michael placing the metal fins onto it's a buffalo hide. We made an articulated shoulder harness. So we made a paper model for that as well to make sure that it would move. And it was really important when she puts her arm up not to stab her head with the big long spike. So these are things that you figure out along the way, yeah. This is her wearing it in her debut music video. She was a member of Destiny's Child, so this is her breakout into her career. So the music videos, the song is I'm Down for Whatever. And you can look it up on YouTube. I've not included it in the presentation. We also made a little bracelet for it. Not the next project. I do a lot of projects that aren't metalsmithing, but those aren't projects that I can say I made this. So I don't. Michael does so many projects that are not included, but you can go to his website and see everything that he does. It's amazing. This is a leather cobra ball cap for Rihanna. So Michael went and picked out his favorite toy snake, and he brought it in and said, I like this snake. And we measured it and made sure it was long enough for the hat. And it's actually a rubber snake, so we had to burn out the mold for a very long time. We deal with a bunch of vendors and casters downtown. Most of the stuff that's like casting or plating, we do out of the studio, but pretty much everything else we do in-house. So on the right is the cast little baby snake that was then soldered together, formed, polished, and then gold-plated, and then sewn to they sent us a leather ball cap. This is her hat. Don't ruin it. Put the snake on. And we sewed the snake on, gave it a little red tongue and 2 Swarovski crystal jet eyes. And she wore that on tour pretty much for the entire tour a couple of years ago. When sometimes you get a project, and I love people that say, well, don't make your poor planning my problem, but that's kind of what we do. We make your poor planning our problem. We'll take care of it for you. So we get this job, and it's Coldplay has Rihanna in a music video called Princess of China. We get this call, okay, the video is shooting tomorrow, and it's all based around, this kind of, it's a conglomeration of a lot of different Eastern cultures in one video, but they have the whole thing based around her dancing with these finger spicula. I think it's the Thai culture that has this in all of their old videos. But, where you have like 10 people standing behind you and all the arms coming out. Well, they were doing it in CGI, so they said, we only need 10. But we need to pick them up in 18 hours. So Michael's like, can you do it? I'm like, if I stop this conversation right now, take Jay and go to my garage, yes, I can do it. He's like, okay, go. So I took my assistant J.U. at the time, and we busted them out. And he's like, I've never microsmithed before. And I kind of did one. I'm like, you're going to learn. And he did 4 of them. He really got a good handle on it. And in 18 hours later, they were formed and polished and ready and sized and ready to be picked up. These are the tools that I used to make the spiculas. I get them from NC Black. The one on the spicula that's on my finger here, I work on Skype a lot with Michael because sometimes he's not available or on the other side of the country or out of the country. So when these jobs come up, you can't just turn them down. You just have to be very, very clear with people exactly what you want. So we worked with video a lot. So we got exactly what he wanted, and then we made 10 of them. This is the pattern for the spicula, if anyone wants to take a little picture and go home and make your own spicula. Halloween's past, though. Here's the microspiculum hammer in this is Purple Heart wood block. I'm raising up the walls of the spicula, and here's 4 of them that are half made. So up in the top, you see the claws that are finished, and she's such a lovely girl. Rihanna showing them off, and then a still from the video. There are a lot of things to do with spicula that are more exciting. These are curved spicula that I like to play with. I haven't really done anything. I want to make a big old mustache with it, but they take the big long ones take a really long time to raise up, and they keep opening. But that you can do more than just a straight spicula. You can curve them if you make a good pattern for it. In 2012, Michael was contracted to pretty much do most of the pieces for the Madonna tour. And the studio put out about 300 different pieces. He did all of those just so that he could do this one piece. This is the crown that opens the tour. Madonna comes out on stage and she's kneeling and praying, and then she comes out on stage, and this is the first thing that you see. So it's really, and when you have a tour, when photographers get to come in and photograph the tour, they're only allowed to see like the first little bit of it. So if you're going to get anything on photo, it's got to be in the first act or first 2 acts of a tour show. This is hollow tube brass because we made a prototype. The prototype is on the right here. It was flat sheet. It's 16 gauge. And we sent it to her for sizing to make sure that it fit. And she sent it back and she said, I'm not going to wear it, it's too heavy. And this is before the pound of crystals went onto it. So we knew that we had to do something. So this is my studio up in the left at the time. I just opened a flat table off over my anvils because they weren't needed for the project. It was fabrication. But the first prototype was poo-pooed. There's an iPhone app that does this. That gave me a lot of satisfaction. So here to the right, you see the second prototype. And Madonna's people actually sent us a head. They said, this is going to be Madonna's head. This is pretty much the size. And this is actually the hair that's going to be like, she's going to have her hair just like this. It's going to be exactly this tall. She knew exactly what she was doing when she was coming out on the crown. So we had to make sure that the crown did not mess up her do. But since it was too heavy, we decided that we have to make it hollow. So the whole crown ended up being a hollow form. So we used the square hollow tube and cut it and made sure that it would work and everyone liked it and it was approved. So on we went. This is the pattern for the crown. This is all the different segments in one direction had to be numbered, and all the different segments in the opposite direction had to be lettered. And each little tube had to be lettered on each side because it rubs off its marker. But if one piece got swapped with another somehow, all the angles would be off, and then the crown wouldn't sit on the base. It's like a little puzzle. And to get it to all sit on one layer, all of the bits of tube had to be filed and then in the meticulous little angles that they have to sit at on the crown. So it's kind of cool. It's constructed kind of, did you ever play with Lincoln logs? Like it has a little half notch and boom, and then you solder it, and then it's just it's a sealed little joint. So the bottom of every little segment, when it was soldered together, had a little hole drilled for venting and draining the pickle out. But pickling this, let me tell you, was an experience. When you get to work with something like this, they don't fit in your crock pot. So here are the little segments coming together. You can see them all laying on one layer and then getting soldered down together. This is it on the pattern. This is when I used to wear a watch. This is it on the pattern. So you can see that. Okay, you can see that all the joints have now been filed. All the crosses were cut out by hand, so all the top borders were cut out, and then it was sweat soldered onto a sheet, and then the cross was cut out and then polished and finished, and then soldered to the tops of the crown. There were 5 crosses that went around the top. So everything was soldered when it was flat. It was formed into the round at the last moment before all the bezels were soldered on. So all of the little loops that you see in these little diamonds, those are for the little dangling crystals that'll move and shimmer when she's standing still on stage. Michael had a really particular way of how he wanted the crystals laid out. Like I said, since it's not going to fit in my crock pot, I got these big old Rubbermaid bins and then just cold pickled it in sodium bisulfate. And even when it was formed back into the round, did not fit in my pickle. Had to rotate it in sections, and then I ended up using a bucket. But at this point, I took it down to Quaker City Plating down in South LA, and asked them if it could even be plated, because it's a hollow form. Sometimes they'll turn down jobs if they're just like, I know this won't come out well. But after meeting with them for a little bit, they said that they could do it, but they requested a lot more venting than just the little holes down in the bottom, because they said it will never drain. It will cross-contaminate our different baths that it has to go in. So we ended up drilling behind every of these little settings a little hole. So this is how Michael wanted the crystals laid out. We took lots of photos so that we didn't forget. This is, you can see the prototype crown hanging out here while we're actually working on the second prototype crown, while we're actually working on the first crown. Obviously, I do not work alone. This isn't the Angelina show. Michael has always allowed me to have at least one assistant that's really always there. This is when the crown gets formed into the round, and now all of the bezels are getting soldered on. They're Swarovski bezel. They're all prefab. We didn't sit down and make all the bezels. But we did sweat solder them onto the crown, and there are 450 of them. Guess who got to set most of the crystals? My assistant. So this is all the holes getting drilled into all the bezels. And these are all the pile of plated ones. Those are all the little hanging ones. And notice that the crown has this inner wire, inner lattice inside of it. That's to keep the veil that falls from the crown when she wears it on stage off of her hair. And that's why they sent us the wig. They said, make sure nothing touches her hair. So that was very important. So this is, in the end, that gets painted black with enamel, and then the veil gets sewn to it. So you can see this is sitting on my pile of, studio stuff, but all the crystals have been set into the top. So in the studio, I'm still setting crystals into the back side of this crown, but the girl to the right, at the same time, is sewing the veil in, because there's not time. We have to get to FedEx by 5:30, or this thing isn't going to be there, and then we're going to hear about it. So we had to work in tandem with each other, and I actually finished setting the crystals for this one on the floor of FedEx, while one of us feigned crying because the shipment was because the truck was going to leave. Like, no, we're going to get fired. Don't do this. Yeah. Crocodile tears pay off sometimes. So for a tour, duplicates have to be made of everything. The original crown we had 2 weeks to make each crown. The original crown took 180 hours. Setting the crystals alone took 18 hours. But this is her wearing it on stage with her full-length veil. Michael went around trying to find this fine French lace, and he found it, and it made the perfect pair to the crown. And it's got little Swarovski crystals hot fixed all over it so that it glimmered and sparkled. And she comes out on stage, and she takes it off, and she throws it on the ground. Every show and rehearsal. So one of the other things about having to we learned that when we gave her the second prototype, because it had to be light, not only because she wasn't going to wear it if it was heavy, but she decided it's going to be thrown on the ground for the act. So it's part of the show. So we actually started making a third one, and Michael called me one day. He's like, so I don't know if this is going to make you happy or really upset. I'm like, what is it? He's like, what if I told you didn't have to finish making the third crown? I was like, are you joking? He's like, no. I'm like, that would make me really happy. He's like, oh, good. Yeah, you don't have to make it. I'm like, oh, okay. Because the crowns were actually standing up to being thrown on the ground, because when they did it the first time, they're like, it's bending. I'm like, bend it back. And then they did, and I got to see one of the crowns in the Madonna archive that's downtown, because she has a floor that's just rows of all of her archives, outfits and things, if she ever needs to look back, and it's all museum cataloged. It's really impressive. But we went to the bin and pulled it out, and it was, it had a little bit of wear on it, but all of the crystals, when they were set, because we knew it was going to get thrown, had we epoxied them in, and then we folded the little prongs over, so crystals weren't just flying left and right. We pulled it out, and surprisingly, it actually had held up. It had a little bit of cracking, but was more or less together. I was super impressed.
How much did it weigh? Your final one. How much did it weigh?
Probably about 2.5 pounds.
How much did it cost?
I'm not allowed to say. But it's funny with projects like this, because when you're looking to do a whole tour, you're not necessarily looking to make money on one piece. This is kind of the piece that you want it, but you say, I'm going to do it better than anyone else, and then you dangle it out in front and say, I'll do the crown for you, but you got to let me do all these pieces. So I can't actually say like what one piece would cost in the scope of a tour, but it was a very good year. Michael's got a great story to how he started out. He grew up in Kansas and on a farm, and he went to New York when he was like 18, and he fell in love with it. And he went home to Kansas, and then for the rest of his time in Kansas, he planned his way to get back to New York. And he pretty much lived in his car and slept on friends' couches and just pursued his dream as a designer. So he taught himself how to solder. He made jewelry and objects out of found objects and a lot of things that weren't, terribly expensive for someone that's just starting out. And so he soldered together this chainmail dress, and it found its way into a Soho boutique. And who happened by but Cher, who saw it, went in and inquired about the designer, and they wouldn't give up his information. But luckily he had a friend that was working at the store who on her way out, he slipped her his phone number, and she called him, and she invited him out to LA to live with her at her house and make clothing for all of her celebrity friends. So that's Michael Schmidt's story that's a very summarized story for how he started out. But John Bon Jovi, Steven Tyler, like all these guys that he would just alter their clothes, make their tour stuff, metal mesh shirts and things, and he got all of his clientele that he still works with now kind of from that experience. So had Cher not happened by and seen the dress, I wouldn't be talking to you right now, likely. This is an articulated hammered aluminum collar that we made. And it's also probably one of a designer's worst nightmare, because Michael was in New York on another job, and we had just finished the prototyping of the first crown. So we were, it was the end of that week, and Michael called up and he was like, I'm in New York and we have to do this job. And he's like, I know we're all tired, but we can't let this one go. And he only had his iPad with him. So I said, okay, well, draw out to the best, send me whatever you can, like imagery, anything. So he had his iPad in a draw application, and he did his little doodle, and he sent it over to me. And we worked it out on Skype, like how everything was going to articulate. There wasn't time for plating because this had to be done in 36 hours. Like I said, don't work alone. So I had 2 people helping hammer texture all the pieces and file and polish the edges. I'm not a particular fan of aluminum, but since there wasn't time for plating, and nowhere in Southern California do they sell sheet nickel, which I don't understand. You have to order it online, and then you have to wait for shipping. So you have to have a lot of it on hand, which is very expensive, or you have to work in aluminum. So aluminum it was, which is fortunate because it made the piece lighter. So from his doodle, I made a pattern and put it on the mannequin and then sent it over to him and got it approved. And then we started on actually making it. So all the pieces, all the rows were, I like letters and numbers. All the rows are lettered and all the columns are numbered. And it's funny. No matter how well you plan, you're going to be putting it together, and then you're going to realize I'm missing a piece. But they're pretty easy. It was pretty quick to cut it out. This wasn't the worst thing in the world, but when a piece of the crown would go missing, I'd be like, nah. So there wasn't solder. I am not skilled at welding aluminum. I know a few people that are, and it's very impressive. But this is all connected with jump rings. This is the finished piece. Because, like I said, because we couldn't solder it or weld it, the fasteners in the back had to be worked into the design of the flat sheet. So they're just like bars that come across and fold back in and loop into the back. And she ended up wearing it in her newest music video, A Woman's World. And she, it's actually kind of crazy. She wears a lot of different outfits in this video, and like 6 different wigs. And all the wigs are fantastic. If you like wigs, all the wigs are fantastic. There's this one, we were on set, and she didn't have anyone that was taking care of her and making sure there wasn't lint on her dress. So Michael was up there. He's like, why is no one handling this? Like picking there's this one wig that's a red wig, and it's all poofy out because the designer that made the wig, shoved wheat up into the red hair. So it was like hair, and then it fades into wheat. So all the wheat was falling all over her black dress at the time. Ooh, at demo day last year when I gave a presentation, that was the most current project that we just saw that had hit news. You never know. You can't. I'm not allowed to talk about anything until it's already been seen. So at the time that I was doing demo day, that morning that video hit the internet. So I was like, oh my God, I have something new, and I put it in my presentation. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, Rihanna wore a necklace I made a year ago at a Clippers game, and we finally got a photo of it. So that's this presentation. This is I guess the most recent thing that's hit the press now. So this is a hand-fabricated curb chain out of brass with a box clasp and a little ID tag. So all of the chain was made out of that thick brass stock. We made a little jig, and we heated it up and annealed it and wound it around. And I know they say you're not supposed to work with brass hot, but it was so thick that we worked with it hot. And it didn't crack. It was fine. So we took big old pliers and linked it together, and then we stuck it in the vise, and then we twisted all the links. We annealed it in between all these steps. But then after that, we took a big drop forge hammer and started, hammering it out, and then faceting and finishing it. So this is the chain when it's about halfway done. Then we made the ID tag and the box clasp for it, and she wore. I think it's upside down, but she wore it, which is an important thing. I've had the honor of having a hammer named after me from NC Black Company. So this is the Angelina hammer. Because of my sophisticated work, they say the Angelina is, the long, lean, sophistication. It's perfect when you need longer reach. The little Alice, which is another hammer they do, can provide. So when I was actually working on the second crown, they were doing one of their circuits around the country, and they called me up because they stay at my house. They stayed at my house for weeks at a time in LA because who would want to leave LA? And when they were in Moab, Utah, they called me up and they're like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I'm going crazy over this crown. Like, I've not slept." And they're like, "Oh my God! Like, we have 4 days to kill. We're coming over." So they came over and they stayed. They ended up staying for like a week. But Andrea sat down and like helped me file and like labeled my pieces. And she was like, "What's next?" I was just blown away. And then while they were there, they had the company ship out the Angelina hammer to me, and then that's when they gave it to me. When it was crazy, I was like, "I gotta go." They're like, "Wait and open the package." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Opened it up, and I was just like thrown to tears. They had taken the time to gun blue it and engrave mustaches into it and inlay silver mustaches into it. They're like, "It's like a mustache on a stick." So I have it. If anyone wants to see it at the end, this is actually kind of the end.